Hello. I thought I'd try to do a book review and talk a little bit about this book, Happy Hour at Castle Dracula by Marta Acosta. It concerns the romantic and career misadventures of a young Mexican-American woman called Milagro de los Santos, meaning Miracle of the Saints. And she's caught between various versions of vampires, though I thought I'd read this to see if it's working along any of the similar lines to my story and the stories with which my story appears in an anthology called Evolved 2. And this is a comic, largely character-driven approach to looking at vampires. And the central conflict in the book really, I think, is within the character's own life. She encounters various men trying to move up, make her way in the world, and make use of her education from a university which she calls FU. And she meets various men, which are in some ways are different versions of vampires. Her conflict in one chapter toward the end is summed up like this. I went to bed that night and mulled over everything that had happened. The choice was obvious when I was presented with beach read relationships, hedonistic Ian Ducharme and admirable Sam. I had found the happy middle ground. I was becoming the sincere and serious woman I longed to be. I don't know what I dreamed, but I awoke confused and in a cold sweat. So through the book, she's struggling, as you can tell in many of the titles of the chapters, sense and insensibility, survival of the fabbist, wherein our heroine loses her fashion sense, trying to become interested in more serious things, as in many ways society is when dealing with these issues. But a lot of the time, there's a tremendous amount of description of her makeup and her clothing and her fashion and how her body is changing shape and whether it's changing in a way that's still attractive to men. So there's this conflict within her and within the book itself as to whether she's going to live life as a beach read, something you just do casually and forget about after you've read it for a couple hours, or whether she's going to be more seriously engaged. And she's thrown into this conflict that's between two family bloodlines that have been around for years and years and years, and secretive ancient families that are powerful, and that she's been excluded from in part because of her economic background and her ethnic background. In some ways it's a comment on the different roles people play when they're some of them are white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, and some of them are the people who were on the losing side of the European conflicts to control the New World, namely the Spanish. So she's trying to move up, make her way in the world, and not take it all too seriously, and this is what drives the book. It might be considered a literary approach to writing in that it's character-driven, and therein lie the strengths and the weaknesses of the book. It's a fun, witty, engaging tone, and it's interesting, fun to read. It doesn't quite get in as deeply into the questions of the supernatural or science as other science fiction and fantasy novels do. It engages the reader enough to be lightly touch on certain questions that are big ones in society today, but not completely overwhelm them with them. I think that the strengths are character, the way that the woman interacts with these people from this other culture, these privileged, rich people that she becomes involved with because they are genetic mutations. They are vampires with a small v. They have a difference in their blood and in their family bloodline that makes them act a little differently than normal people. And she starts getting involved with these rich and privileged people, and she's trying to find a way for herself to advance her place in society, get a good job, find a good man to marry, and so on. But at the same time, she gets involved with these multinational corporations and secret societies and so on, because one of the vampire factions has some mutations that might conceivably be medically valuable in helping people live longer and healthier lives, and the other faction is trying to control them and patent them and sell their medical applications to the highest bidder. So though she gets involved with various men who are vampires in one way or another, and it touches on some similar topics to what I have in my own story, in that she asks one man, why is your corporation so interested in vampires? Are you worried about the competition from other blood-sucking parasites. Plot, I think, is probably the weakest point in the novel, other than perhaps theme, in that it doesn't deal with these questions in great depth sometimes. It's not a heavily plot-driven novel. Toward the beginning there's some action, and toward the end there's perhaps too much. It's as though she started out with a literary approach and said, oh, I've forgotten plot. This has some science fiction fantasy elements, and I should be having more happen in this book, so I'll talk to somebody else who's written these kind of books and I'll throw in some plot, and it all got sort of packed in toward the end. So that was the one flaw I would see in the book. But on the whole, it's engaging tone. The characters are interesting and fun to deal with and watch as they evolve, to use one of the words from my own anthology. And evolution is a major question in this book, although it's much below the surface, in that can these people who have this mutation continue to survive, and must our world find some way to evolve beyond its traditional means of being organized in terms of blood-sucking corporations. So generally quite a strong book, I think, well written. And if you like a beach read, or if you're on the cusp of whether you want to have a beach read or something possibly a little more serious, this might be something to look into.